Let me again emphasize, however, under medical supervision. On a prolonged fast, your body is doing a lot of hard work, and someone knowledgeable needs to check through physical exams, through blood tests, through urine tests, to make sure that your organs are all up to the job. It's uncommon for things to go wrong on a prolonged fast, but it does sometimes happen. So if you have a doctor there who's checking you and finds something off, they'll make an adjustment or have you break your fast until your body recovers. But without a doctor checking you, you could fast your way into trouble, completely unaware that your fast is damaging your organs, which you may not find out till it's too late. A few people have even died from unsupervised fasts. So prolonged fasting shouldn't be taken lightly. Okay, so that's fasting for high blood pressure. Before I move on, let me address a question. Before I move on to the next disease, let me address a question that some of you probably have when you hear me talk about a fast of 7 days or 10 days or 17 days. And that question is, what about hunger? If you've never fasted before, you may be thinking, oh God, I could never do that. The hunger would just drive me insane. Here's the secret. Remember earlier when I was talking about daily fasting and I said that volunteers who fasted 18 hours a day reported being no hungrier than people who ate normally? And remember that the reason was because when we extend our overnight fasts, we burn a little more fat. And one of the breakdown products of our fat, ketone bodies, actually blunt our hunger. Well, on a prolonged fast, we burn pounds and pounds of fat, and all the ketones that are released just kill our hunger. So most people feel no hunger after about a second day or so of a fast. In fact, they feel so little hunger that they can watch cooking demonstrations during their fasts, which most fasting clinics offer as a way of teaching people how to cook more healthily. And these fasters, they aren't the slightest bit tempted. All right. Now let's look at one more supposedly irreversible disease that prolonged fasting can in fact reverse: rheumatoid arthritis. Rheumatoid arthritis, RA, is an autoimmune disorder in which the body attacks the linings of its own joints, and it literally cripples the sufferer. Conventional medicine doesn't have a cure, just drugs that somewhat slow the terrible decline. But during the 20th century, multiple fasting doctors reported that fasts of days or weeks could slow or even reverse RA. Not until the late 1970s, though, did scientists, all of them in this case in Scandinavia, finally look into the question. In one of their studies, volunteers made a short fast of just 7 to 10 days. Then they ate a vegetarian diet for 9 weeks. And about a third of them not only had less pain and stiffness, but needed fewer painkillers. That was pretty interesting. So a second study was done, and it found that during a fast of 7 days, the joints of RA patients were less tender and less inflamed compared to a control group that didn't fast. The fasters in this study also enjoyed a drop in their red blood cell sedimentation rate, which is a marker of body-wide inflammation. When the researchers looked into the mechanisms behind these improvements, they discovered that the fasters' neutrophils, which are white blood cells that fight infection, those neutrophils got better at killing certain bacteria. Now, this was interesting because researchers think rheumatoid arthritis may be caused in part by neutrophils that act up and attack the body. So what did it mean for RA that fasting made neutrophils work better? A third study set out to answer this question, and it found that when sufferers of RA fasted for a week, their overactive neutrophils seemed to calm down. One sign of this calming was that the neutrophils released less of an enzyme called lysozyme. Now, usually lysozyme is good for us. It's part of the artillery that our immune system uses to batter down the cell walls of harmful bacteria. But in RA patients, an excess of lysozyme may be part of what's damaging their joints. What's interesting here is that fasting, according to these two studies, turned down the harmful self-destructive effects of neutrophils, yet turned up the neutrophils' helpful disease-fighting effects. Fasting was acting like some kind of like a dream steroid that dialed down the autoimmune response of the immune system, but without dampening the immune system's ability to fight off intruders. Real steroids dial down the autoimmune response, but unfortunately dampen the immune system in the process. not coincidentally, the RA patients in this study also had less morning stiffness, less tenderness, and less overall inflammation. Okay, so this was all really promising stuff, but these Scandinavian studies, which were done between 1979 and 1988, were all small and were either uncontrolled or only modestly controlled. And conventional doctors almost entirely ignored them. But since other treatments for RA were so ineffective, and since these studies were so radiant with promise, another group of Scandinavian researchers put together a larger, better controlled trial. A doctor in Oslo named Jens Kjeldsen Krag agreed to lead the experiment, and he must have been awfully glad he did, because in 1991, the results of the study landed in one of the world's most prestigious medical journals, The Lancet. Kjeldsen Krag's team took 53 people with rheumatoid arthritis and divided them into two groups. For the first month, one of the groups went to a health farm while the other went to a rest home. After the first month, both groups finished the rest of the year-long trial at their own homes. Now, the group that was sent to the health farm did a modified fast of 7 to 10 days. Every day, they slurped down 200 to 300 calories of thin broths, which was just enough to give them a little energy, but not so many calories as to pull them out of ketosis, the fat-burning, ketone-producing state that's one of the hallmarks of a fasting metabolism. After their fasts of 7 to 10 days, for the next 3.5 months, they ate a vegan diet. And after that, for the rest of the year, they ate a vegetarian diet. Meanwhile, the group that was sent to the rest home for a month ate normally, both while they were at the rest home and for the remainder of the year at their own homes. Their diet was a pretty standard Western diet with a lot of meat, dairy, eggs, refined grains, other processed foods. Just 4 weeks into the study, the fasting and vegan group had improved on nearly every measure of arthritis that the researchers checked. Number of swollen joints, number of tender joints, degree of tenderness, duration of morning stiffness, grip strength, overall pain, and levels of inflammatory markers like red blood cell sedimentation rate, C-reactive protein, and white blood cell count. At the end of the year, after being switched to a vegetarian diet, this fasting vegan vegetarian group still maintained nearly all of these gains. They were also in better overall health than before the trial, and they lost an average of 9 pounds. Meanwhile, the control group also enjoyed less overall pain during their month at the rest home, but they didn't do nearly as well on other markers, and even the small improvements they got quickly disappeared once they left the rest home. 11 months later, at the end of the trial, they were in more pain than they had been in beforehand, and on nearly every other metric, including their own assessment of their health, they had badly deteriorated. In other words, their disease took the usual sad course. Now, why did the fasters do so well? Their fasts were clearly important, as we saw in the mechanistic discussion earlier, but the vegan diet was probably just as essential. We suspect this from a later trial in which RA patients fasted for 7 to 10 days, then ate a Mediterranean diet that had plenty of animal products, and their rheumatoid arthritis hardly improved at all. So, going back to Kjeldsen Krag's 1991 study, the contrast between the fasting group and the controlled group could not have been sharper, and the placement of the results in the Lancet could not have been better. But almost no one paid any attention. No rheumatologist canceled the appointments of his RA patients and packed them off to fasting clinics. No rheumatology association suggested the standard of care for RA be changed to put fasting at the top of the list. Just to recap what it was that everyone was ignoring, a single fast of a modest length, just 7 to 10 days, followed by a diet rich in plants, substantially slowed or even reversed a supposedly intractable, irreversible disease. Better still, this therapy had virtually no harmful side effects, just good ones like healthy weight loss. And the only other treatment that doctors had, the one they were using all the time, were drugs that weren't nearly as good at slowing the disease, let alone reversing it, and the drugs were dangerous. The leading drug for RA today is methotrexate, and its common side effects include bleeding gums and mouth sores, nausea and stomach pain, bloody vomiting and diarrhea, rapid heartbeat, swelling of the face and hands and feet, and trouble breathing. Its less common, but not unheard of side effects include seizures, loss of voice, and loss of consciousness. Given these effects, someone's going to have to explain to me why almost no doctors today are advising their patients at least to consider a fast under medical supervision, followed by a whole plant diet. It mystifies me that doctors are even allowed to prescribe methotrexate without even telling RA patients that fasting followed by plants has been shown to be an effective alternative in randomized controlled trials published in respected peer-reviewed journals. Unfortunately, scientists haven't done much better than doctors. In the 3 decades since Kelsen-Krause's Lancet study, only one study that I'm aware of, and was published just last year, has tried to replicate its results. And it wasn't a good effort. I'm guessing that the research didn't have much funding because rather than sending their volunteers to a health farm or a rest home for the first month, as in Kelsen-Krause's study, the researchers asked the volunteers to do everything on their own at home. Also, the study lasted just 3 months, not a year. Now, imagine taking a couple of dozen people who are sick and in pain, most of whom have never fasted, have never eaten a vegan diet, and telling them, all right, you're going to fast at home for a week on 300 calories a day, and then you're going to eat nothing but plants for the next 3 months. So say goodbye to all your comfort foods, all those habitual dishes and desserts that you've eaten for the last half a century or more that make you feel a little bit better in your misery. So we have no idea how many of them complied, but we do know that in similar trials, volunteers have a lot of trouble sticking to instructions like these on their own. And in the end, the rheumatoid arthritis of the volunteers in that study improved only very modestly. So I don't think I'm going out on a limb when I speculate that a lot of them probably weren't following the study's protocol. And I'm not speculating at all when I say that in any event, the design of this clinical trial was just plain shoddy. So scientists haven't done even the very basic work of trying to replicate Kelsen-Krause's experiment to confirm or disprove his results. And no researcher has gone farther than that and tried to test the obvious follow-up questions, like if a single fast of just 7 to 10 days followed by a vegan diet seems to do this much good, what might a fast of 7 to 10 days every 3 months do? Or how about a longer fast, say 14 days or 28 or even 40 days, the kind of extended medically supervised fast that fasting doctors have been using for more than a century to reverse all kinds of disorders, including autoimmune diseases like RA. But it's not all bad news. The good news for people who suffer from rheumatoid arthritis is there may be hope through fasting and dietary change. Because it's not just those Scandinavian studies from decades ago that say RA improves when you fast and then eat a whole plant diet. Both the True North Health Center in California and the Buchinger Wilhelmi Clinic of Germany and Spain, which is the world's largest fasting clinic, they've been using fasting protocols for decades to slow and even reverse the RA of hundreds, maybe thousands of patients. I've interviewed some of those patients, and over they say they left the clinic after their fast with much less pain and stiffness and much more mobility than when they entered. Let me close this discussion of RA, though, by emphasizing this important point on safety one more time. If you are sick with something like RA, you really want to fast under medical supervision.